Hey, how's it going tonight, guys? Tonight we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics. You guys gave me a lot of different topics to talk about tonight. Just got back from Lake Okeechobee. I was down there last week fishing the Costa Series, the Southeastern Costa Series tournament. The tournament didn't go as good as I liked, but I promised that I was going to do a tournament recap on every tournament that I fished this year. So I'm going to be telling you guys about my experience down there. And so, what I did is I flew out of St. Louis, flew down there, got down there about a day before the tournament. So I was able to get a couple hours of practice in. And it was really neat going to the pre-tournament meeting, and got to talk with Gary Yamamoto, a little bit with Roland Martin, some of the legends in the sport. And so it was kind of cool getting to talk to them about, what the fishing was like on Okeechobee. But day one was brutal fishing for me. I drew a guy who was keyed in on fishing isolated grass mats. And so what he was doing is he was fishing this grass called pennywort, and it's just like sort of a little circular grass that makes this bed, kind of like a canopy. And down at Okeechobee, there's just not a whole lot of grass right now. And so they've been doing a whole lot of spraying down there, which has affected the fishing tremendously. After talking to some of the guys that were from down there that were fishing the tournament, and so the guy on day one anyway, he was really focusing in on fishing these isolated little grass patches up in South Bay, and he was taking a 1 ounce to 1.25 ounces weight and punching it with a little BB cricket through that grass. And kind of like how he would fish is he'd pull in on the grass bed, power pull down, and then really flip every little nook and cranny, in that grass. And he got 5 keeper bites doing that on day one. After the first 30 minutes, I knew that, there was no way I was probably going to catch a fish doing the same thing behind this guy. So what I did is I went and, fished a lot out behind the back of the boat because pretty much if I was going to try to fish the grass, he'd already worked everything over pretty well. So I threw spinnerbaits, I threw chatterbaits, I flipped a beaver, I threw a jig, threw a Cinco, threw a topwater, and just, I threw a rattle trap even, just couldn't get anything to go. It was a really weird day, and, those are the kind of days that you hope you don't really have very often because they suck. I mean, there's nothing worse than going fishing all day and never even getting one bite. And so, yeah, that's what happened on day one. Now, day two was a completely different day. Completely different day than day one. So day two, I drew a guy that was in the top 20 on the boater side, and he was doing open water fishing. So we ended up going up to a place just up past, South Bay, where there was a little backwater area in there, and there's actually about 15 boats in there fishing when we got there. That's how well these guys were catching fish in that area. And I'd say probably in the first hour I had a limit and was actually calling. I actually had a limit before my boater did on day two. So we ended up catching, I ended up catching about 12 keepers on the day, and my boater probably caught about the same. The only difference is that he was able to get a couple key bites, towards the end of the day, and we'll talk about that. But this area was so different than what I fished on day one. Day one, I was in an area where the water was like pitch black. It was like super stained, and you'd almost lose a black and blue jig after it got, just inches below the surface. And on day two, though, I was fishing an area where the water was really clear. You could see down a couple feet and actually see the bottom in a lot of the places. And so it just seemed like the fish were, real aggressive and ready to go in there. Like I said, I had a limit really early on. And so what I caught the majority of my fish on day two was just a black and blue Cinco. So I was throwing a black and blue Cinco like this one here, and I was throwing it weightless on just a 5-aught wide gap hook. And what I would do is I'd throw this out, and I would just randomly fan cast, because we were catching them up towards the bank, out in the middle of the lake, out in the middle of the cove there. It really didn't seem to matter. There was fish everywhere. And so I caught them all around the boat, throwing this. So I'd throw it out, I just let it go to the bottom, and then I just kind of give it a lift, and let that bait come up off the bottom, and I just let it soak in there. And you know, all throughout the morning I'd get one to pick it up. So caught my initial limit doing this, and then as the day kind of went on, you know, stuff started getting fished a lot harder in there because we had about 16 boats in there fishing. You know, I tried messing around with, you know, some other stuff in order to try to keep, you know, the bites going, and actually ended up catching a couple more keepers by just, you know, putting a little extra weight on there. And so what I did is I took the Cinco and I rigged it with a little 5/16 ounce Pro Tungsten weight, and I just made it so, you know, it would slide up and down the line like this, and this would make the bait just kind of dart a lot more erratically. So I kind of gave it the same presentation where I'd pop it, but then I was, you know, fishing it down and trying to really get down deep into that grass as the sun went on. As the sun came out, and I think the fish got a little bit tighter in there, and there was also some lily pads in there. And so it didn't take much, but this weight kind of helped me get it down in between those pads so I could catch a few more fish doing that. Now, the one thing that we did late in the day, like say after 1:30, is we started trying to get a bigger bite because we both had limits, and that's kind of what we were looking for, is trying to get that bigger bite. So we were throwing spinner baits and chatter baits and throwing a lot of different things. But my boater was actually, at the end of the day, able to catch a 5-pounder, throwing a swim bait just like this, just reeling it across the top of the grass. And that bite was so key to his day because that's what bumped him up into 4th place overall on the boater side. And, you know, had he not gotten that bite, probably would have had about the same weight as I did. And so I really wish that fish, I would have caught him. But I was also kind of happy for the guy to, you know, have a good day as well because, you know, he'd worked his butt off in order to catch that fish. You know, he just stuck with that swim bait in the afternoon and got that big bite. And so, yeah, and it was kind of interesting getting out of the spot because it was so shallow that we could barely get up on plane. That's how shallow it was in there. You know, the deepest water was probably about 2.5 foot or something like that. And so it was just a very unique style. So I got to see kind of both ends of the spectrum as far as fishing on Okeechobee. You know, day one, I got a guy who was punching mats. Day two, I got a guy that was fishing, you know, for the fish that were coming in, more open water. And, yeah, I got to see it all kind of. And so the fish that I weighed in put me in 87th place out of 238, which, you know, that's not exactly where I wanted to end up, obviously. But at the same time, it could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot worse. You know, could have had a bad day on day two as well. I mean, there was a lot of guys that didn't catch him. So, anyways, got some good points. Going to be coming into the next tournament down at Lake Chickamauga. Been there before, so got a good idea of, you know, kind of what the fishing could be like there at the end of March. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and you know, like one of the things too is, you know, this year I'm taking some chances. Like I'm trying to fish out of my comfort zone and you know, see some different lakes across the country, which I think is big, you know, in you know, in broadening your horizons and trying to learn. You know, I think, you know, you always learn something when you fish with different people. And yeah, so that's part of what I got going on this year as well. So next weekend, this upcoming weekend, I'll be going to Lake Hamilton, which is in Arkansas. I'm fishing the Mr. Bass of Arkansas Tournament Trail. It's a Pro-Am trail, so I'll be fishing that. We're going to be at Lake Hamilton this Sunday. So next week, what I'll do is I'll do a tournament recap on how that tournament goes. The last time I was at Lake Hamilton was for the BFL that was in September last year, and I'm really wanting to get some vengeance on Lake Hamilton because the last time I fished there, I ended up tying for the last check. I ended up, you know, tying for 18th place out of 100-something boats, and basically we had the same weight, but because he had 5 fish and I had 4 fish, he won the tiebreaker, and the guy got the fish day 2 of the tournament and got a check, and I didn't get a check and had to go home. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to Hamilton, seeing if I can do better this time. I know the last time I was on Hamilton, I actually caught all my fish throwing a drop shot. And so I had 4 keepers the last time I was down there. And what I was doing was I was drop shotting one of these little robo worms here in Morning Dawn. that's a really good bait anytime you have a lake that has a lot of spotted bass in it. So Hamilton, when I was there the last time, it seemed like the majority of the fish that were weighed in were spots. And, you know, that might be totally different, you know, come this weekend, because totally different time of the year. And you know, maybe, you know, some guys will bring in some big largemouth. But, so I'm going to be bringing, you know, some baits like this. This is a new bait by Z-Man. This is the little trick shot. This looks pretty good to me. I'm going to have these down there. It's just a little shad-shaped worm like that. And so if I have to, you know, I might have to catch a couple Kentuckys doing something like that on a drop shot. You know, a couple other things that you know, I consider that might work down there on Hamilton. You know, with these spots, you might get into some deep fish, because that lake is pretty clear. It's kind of like Lake of the Ozarks, only it's just smaller, and you know, it's got docks, but the docks aren't as big, and the water's a lot clearer. Might actually get out and do some spoon fishing, and you know, I might even throw like one of these little blade baits here. And so I'm gonna have these when I'm down there. I've got some spoons. That's just in case, you know, I get somebody that's, you know, on some deep schooling fish where, you know, you're fishing vertically for them. Of course, you know, the Alabama rig, probably gonna be a lot of fish caught this weekend doing that. You know, guys are gonna be throwing that Alabama rig over some brush piles, you know, around the docks. Gonna be throwing a jerkbait probably. And you know, the one deal too that, you know, I'm going to be thinking about in the back of my mind when I'm down there is maybe throwing one of these little Ned rigs. And so this is just a little Z-Man Ned rig. This color here is called the Deal. And that works really good down there. Caught some fish last time I was down on that. And so yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to just, you know, learning this tournament. I've only fished Hamilton one time before. Hopefully can catch some fish. I know the lake's got a history of, you know, being good with crankbaits. People catch a lot of fish on, you know, red rattle traps and red crankbaits down there. And, you know, that's always something I like to do, is throw a crankbait. So you can bet if we get into doing that, I'm going to have a lot of fun probably doing that. So, yeah, so look forward, you know, to this weekend coming up. You know, I'll have a video next week for you guys on, you know, how I do it at Lake Hamilton. So one thing I wanted to get into tonight is giving you guys a tip on fishing crankbaits, because crankbaits are something that I really like to fish with a lot. And so when it comes to crankbaits, you know, like one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make when they throw a crankbait is they don't change their hooks out through the day. And so you can imagine a crankbait, you know, this crankbait is going to be, you know, beating along the bottom all day, digging into those rocks. And you know, throughout the course of the day, you might get hung up on a rock here or there, and what that does is it actually bends the hooks out, and you know, and dulls the hooks on your crankbait. And so, you know, that's one thing that you really want to pay attention to, is how sharp your hooks are on your crankbait. A lot of people, you know, they tie a bait on, they'll throw that same bait all day, and they won't really inspect their hooks. Whereas if I'm fishing crankbaits throughout the day, I might change out my treble hooks 2 or 3 times throughout the day if that's what I'm doing the entire day. Because, you know, these hooks, they're going to get dull when you're banging those rocks with that crankbait. And so as far as hooks on a crankbait, the best hooks that you can get for cranking, and I do a lot of crankbait fishing, is these Kevin Van Dam triple grip hooks, okay? And so most of the baits that I'm throwing this time of the year, you might get away with like a size 6 or a size 4 treble hook, okay? So there's no hooks in here because I got them all, you know, all on my baits. But these triple grips, most of the time, if you get one hooked up with these, as long as you're not using, you know, too crazy of a rod where it's, you know, a super stiff rod, as long as you're using a medium action rod, you get one of these hooks on them, they're coming in the boat most of the time. I mean, I hardly lose fish on these. You know, kind of didn't want to say that because, you know, I'm sort of superstitious with that. But at the same time, these triple grips are the berries. When you're throwing a crankbait, if you get these hooks on there, your landing percentage is going to go way up. I've found no better hook for crankbait fishing, in my opinion. You know, maybe somebody else has a different opinion. You know, make sure you drop those comments below. But as far as crankbait fishing goes, man, it's really hard to beat one of these Mustad Ultra Points. So this is what I do on my crankbaits. And what I do is I put them on all my crankbaits. Like if you look at my crankbait box, like 85 to 90% of what I throw is going to have those kind of hooks on. So there's a tip for you for throwing crankbaits. Okay, so tomorrow, Thursday, I'm going to be down at the St. Louis Boat Show. I'm going to be down there with Razor Rods. So I'll be down there tomorrow night. So, you know, if you got nothing else to do and you're in St. Louis, make sure you come down, check out the boat show. I'll be at the Razor Rod booth. So you want to be able to check out that and come down, you know, ask me questions on fishing. We can talk Lake of the Ozarks fishing, you know, different stuff I got coming up. You know, just stop by, check out the rods. Razor Rods is making some awesome rods. You know, come down, pick one up, and you know, and see how it feels in your hand. So I'll be down there tomorrow night. Yeah, and so I guess like another thing too that we could talk about would be jig trailers. So somebody asked me a question about, you know, the video I put out last week. They're asking me, you know, what kind of trailers do I throw on my jigs, and you know, what are the different baits that I use for trailers on those jigs? So I've got a whole bunch of different baits here that I will throw on my jigs, and you know, so most of the time when I'm jig fishing, this little pack of chunk here is what I'm going to be using. This bait here on the back of a jig. Here I have a, you know, a J-Town tackle jig here, and so this little pack of chunk here works really well on a football jig like this. And it's real small, real compact, day in and day out. That's probably my favorite jig trailer, is just putting one of these little pack of chunks here on the back of one of my jigs. And so I'm going to show you how that looks on the jig there. So that's what that looks like. And day in and day out, that's one of my favorite jig trailers to put on a jig. Now another one that works really good, and you know, guys that are in the know, they're already going to know that you can do this. But for some of you guys that are just getting into jig fishing, you may have or you may not have thought of ever doing this. But this is kind of a secret of mine, and so I'm giving you guys the juice right now. But one thing that works really good on a football jig is a full-size brush hog like this. And that might look just crazy, you know, or idiotic to you, but I'm telling you right now, that deal right there, certain times of the year, will catch you more fish than any of these trailers combined on the back of your jig, especially in the fall. I've caught tons of big fish on this jig. That's a really good trailer. And then there's a couple other ones. So this one here is a Missile Baits. This works really good at night. I actually throw a lot of big trailers like this on my jigs. It's something that I'll do, you know, at Lake of the Ozarks, and I've done it before on other lakes. Last year, actually won a night tournament with a buddy of mine on Lake St. Louis, throwing a jig with one of these trailers on there like that. And so it works really good at night, moves a lot of water. It's just a good big fish bait. Okay. And a couple of the other ones that are really hard to beat, the speed crawl. Speed crawls are always really good. You want to throw these on your little finesse jigs. You can also put these on your football jigs, but I like to throw this on a little finesse jig because it's just real small and compact, and these little arms just kind of float up. That works really good. And then of course the sweet beaver. If I'm skipping like a dock or something like that, this works really good on a jig for skipping. So what you want to do is you'll just strut it up on there like that. And what you want to do is you want to kind of trim a little bit of the skirt material on the back side of your jig. And what you're going to do is you're just going to get that plastic on the other side, and that's going to skip really well when you're trying to throw that up under a dock. And you'll catch a lot of fish doing that. And then I've got two other trailers here. You can't beat the old standard little 3-inch little double tail grub like that. That works really good as well. And then here's one that probably a lot of you guys haven't seen before. Okay, so this is kind of an oddball trailer, but it catches a lot of fish. And this is kind of a secret. Haven't really talked about it much. But yeah, I'll take this guy right here and I'll throw that on my jig. And yeah, this is something else. So when you rig this up like this, you can see I've got all these legs and appendages going here. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll throw this around brush piles and fish that I know that are kind of highly pressured, and that gives them a completely different look than anything that they've seen. And all these little arms just like float up. So yeah, that's pretty much all the different trailers that I use for my jigs. So yeah, so now you guys have seen all the different baits that I put on the back of them. But yeah, so anyways, guys, so hope you guys enjoyed the show tonight. Like I said, I need you guys to give me some more questions to answer. Make sure you guys comment below, and hit like if you liked the video tonight, and also make sure you subscribe to the channel. Until next time, guys, we'll catch you later.